Libra, if lately you have felt your life quietly shifting, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniably real, you are not imagining it. Mornings feel a little lighter. Old thoughts no longer carry the same weight. And somewhere in your chest, a sense of trust appears, hard to name, but impossible to ignore. All of it seems to whisper that a new chapter is preparing to open. Libra has spent a long time learning how to balance itself, holding back words, staying quiet so no one else would be hurt, including you. And after everything you have carried in silence, life begins to answer you in its own way. Not rushed, not showy, but precise. This is not a story about miracles happening overnight. This is a story about timing, about the moment when things finally fall into place. And if you are wondering what is truly waiting for you ahead, slow down and listen carefully, because from this very moment, a new door has already begun to open. Dear Libra, if there is an evening when you find yourself sitting very still for a long time, not because you are sad, not because you are happy, just a quiet urge to slow down, then perhaps you are standing at the edge of something very thin. Not a loud door, not one that creaks open with noise, just a narrow line of light, enough to let you realize you are no longer standing in the same place you once were. For a long time, you have been used to asking yourself whether you were going the right way or the wrong one. You weighed every choice. You thought of others more than yourself. And sometimes you wondered why you were not more decisive, more forceful, more certain. But if you look back slowly, you may notice that those uncertain days taught you something important. They taught you how to listen to your own emotions, to listen to the rhythm of life, and to listen to what was never said out loud. The shift happening now does not feel like a storm. It feels more like an underground current. You cannot see it clearly, but you can feel it. Old thoughts begin to lose their weight. Things that once held you in place no longer keep you there for long. You may not have words yet for what is changing, but deep inside, you know you are not the same person you were a few months ago or a few years ago. A new door, sometimes, is not a grand opportunity or a dramatic decision. It can be the moment you stop forcing yourself to please everyone. The moment you allow yourself to say no without feeling guilty. The moment you choose peace instead of proving your worth. These changes are small, but they quietly open a very different kind of life for you. Libra has always searched for balance, but few people talk about how many times you had to lean and bend to create it. There were moments you wondered if you were losing yourself, and maybe the truth is not that you were losing yourself, but that you were learning how to let go, letting go of expectations that no longer fit, letting go of roles you carried for far too long, letting go of old stories you once believed defined who you were. When a new chapter opens, old experiences do not disappear. They simply stop controlling you. You carry them as memories, as lessons, not as weight. And in the space that opens because of that, you begin to breathe more easily, to think more clearly, to live just one beat slower, slow enough to feel. You may not know where you are going next, and that is completely okay. Not every door asks you to walk through it right away. Sometimes it is enough to stand there for a moment, to watch the light come through, and let yourself grow familiar with the feeling of something new. Real change does not come from moving fast. It comes from being willing to walk forward without being pulled back by old fears. And if right now you feel like you are standing in the middle of something you cannot quite name, trust that it is not being lost. It may simply be the moment you are becoming, And in that quiet space, a new door is opening, softly, gently, in the way meant just for you. Libra, when you look back at everything you have been through, there were probably many moments when you wondered why it all felt so hard, why the challenges kept coming, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, long enough to exhaust you, while you stayed silent. There were sadnesses you never fully named, not exactly loss, not exactly failure, just the feeling of having to hold yourself together for far too long so nothing would fall apart. You became used to standing in the middle, between right and wrong, between what you wanted and what others expected of you, between speaking up and choosing silence to keep the peace. And many times, that balance itself became the weight. No one saw how tired you were because you always seemed fine. No one knew how many times you adjusted yourself just to keep everything around you from tipping over. But if you slow down long enough, you may begin to see that those challenges were not meant to punish you. They arrived like quiet tests, not to measure how strong you were, but to help you understand how much you could carry and what truly mattered to you. Every time you felt you could not go on, you learned a little more about your own limits. And somehow, without making noise, you became steadier than the version of yourself you once were. There are seasons in life where we do not grow through joy, but through endurance. Libra lived through that season in a very personal way. No drama, no big turning points, just long stretches of balancing your inner world, of healing small wounds that lingered longer than expected. Those experiences taught you empathy, not only for others, but for yourself. They taught you that you do not have to be perfect to be worthy of understanding. There may have been times when you felt you had to prove too much, prove that you deserved your place, prove that you were not weak, prove that your choices were right. And then, one day, you grew tired of proving. And in the moment you stopped trying to convince the world, you found a quiet peace you had been searching for all along. Challenges complete their purpose when you no longer look at them with resentment. When you realize that without those lost and uncertain days, you would not appreciate the clarity you feel now. Without those unnamed sadnesses, you would not be sensitive enough to notice simple joy. And without all those moments of holding on, you would never have learned how to let go at the right time. Libra does not need to become someone else to deserve good things. You are already enough. Enough experience, enough growth, enough depth to step into a new chapter without carrying your past as proof of your worth. Any reward, if it comes, does not have to be something you can touch. Sometimes it is simply the lightness you feel when you realize you are no longer fighting. And if right now your heart feels a little calmer than it used to, trust that it is not by chance. It may be a sign that the challenges have stepped back, making space for another journey, a journey where you walk forward, not out of obligation, but out of a deep agreement between your heart and the life you are choosing to live. Libra, after the challenges slowly begin to fade into the background, you may notice a feeling that is hard to describe. Not excitement, not certainty, but a gentle clarity, quietly settling into your thoughts each day. You start to look at your work differently. You see money, responsibility, and the road ahead with less heaviness in your eyes. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer as lost as before. Success sometimes does not arrive with applause or big milestones. It shows up as a morning when you wake up and know what to do next, even if it is something very small. It appears when you stop comparing yourself to others, when you stop chasing a rhythm that was never meant to be yours. You begin to realize that certain opportunities only appear when you are living as your true self, not when you are trying to become a version that feels acceptable. The new energy you are sensing is not pushing you to move faster. It is inviting you to slow down, slow enough to see what truly fits and what no longer belongs. In your work, you may notice you are no longer interested in doing everything at all costs. Instead, you care more about doing what is right for your values, right for your abilities, and right for a pace you can sustain over time. Money begins to feel different too. It is no longer a constant worry or something you use to prove yourself. You start to see it as a tool that supports your life, not as a measure of your worth. You may not have everything, but you know you are choosing a path that costs you less mentally, and that alone is a quiet form of success. The opportunities appearing now may not look like what you once imagined. They are not flashy. They do not ask you to trade away your peace. They arrive just enough, as if life is gently asking whether you are ready to receive what truly fits. It might be an invitation, an idea, a connection, or simply a small decision made at the right moment. And you realize you no longer need to force yourself to say yes to everything. Libra has always been sensitive to imbalance. In the past, you may have exhausted yourself trying to hold too many things together at once. But now, you are beginning to understand that success is not about how much you accomplish, but about how long you can maintain harmony. When your inner world no longer resists your actions, when you no longer have to convince yourself each day that you are on the right path, every step becomes lighter. You may still have doubts. That is natural. Anyone who has lived through uncertainty learns to be careful when things begin to brighten. But instead of asking whether you deserve this, you start asking whether this truly fits you. That shift matters. It shows that you are placing inner truth above outer standards. You do the right thing, not because someone tells you to, but because your heart is no longer pulling you backward. You move at the right time, not because the moment is perfect, but because you are more ready not to sabotage your own chances. Success in this season is not a destination. It feels more like a steady current, where every step has its reason to exist. And if there are moments when you feel yourself moving forward, quietly, without noise, without recognition, remember this: sustainable journeys rarely begin with a loud sound. They begin with inner clarity, with the feeling that you no longer need to run away or chase after anything. You are simply moving in deep agreement with the life you are slowly building day by day. Libra, when you begin to walk more slowly and stop trying to control everything, you may start to notice something very subtle. There are moments when things seem to flow more naturally, not because you suddenly became better at everything, but because you are no longer pushing against the current of life the way you once did. Good things do not rush in all at once. They arrive quietly, as if they have been there all along, waiting for you to become calm enough to notice them. Blessings sometimes do not have a clear shape. They may appear as a conversation that feels random, yet arrives at exactly the right moment. As someone who enters your life, not to change everything, but simply to remind you of who you are. A piece of advice may sound simple at first, almost ordinary, yet it stays with you for a long time, echoing in your thoughts. These things are easy to miss when we are too busy worrying or rushing forward. But when you slow down, you begin to see them more clearly. You may have believed for a long time that you had to do everything on your own, carry the responsibility, hold the balance, even for things that were never truly yours. And so, you grew familiar with loneliness, even when people were around you. But in this season, you may begin to feel a very gentle kind of support. Not someone pulling you forward by the hand, but the quiet sense that when you take a step, the ground is still there beneath you. The right connections, at the right time, rarely arrive with noise or drama. They come naturally. You do not have to strain to be understood. You do not have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's space. The quality of connection feels different now, lighter, more honest, and it does not ask you to be anything other than who you are. It might be someone who listens without offering advice, or someone who walks beside you for a while, then leaves quietly when their role is complete. And then there are moments of luck that seem almost accidental. You meet the right person on the right day. You avoid a choice that later you realize would have taken you off course, or simply things do not turn out as badly as you once feared. These moments may not be big enough to call miracles, but they are enough to soften the doubt that you have been forgotten. Blessings placed behind the scenes are not meant to make you passive. They are reminders that life does not always ask you to fight your way forward. Sometimes good things arrive when you allow yourself to soften just a little, when you stop forcing everything to follow an old plan, when you become willing to adjust, willing to listen, willing to trust that you do not need to control everything in order to be safe. Libra is deeply sensitive to imbalance and unfairness. You feel it strongly when you give more than you receive. But in this phase, you may begin to sense a very quiet form of compensation. Not always what you hoped for, but what you needed. It may be a sense of calm, a well-timed pause, or the feeling of being understood without having to explain yourself too much. You are not alone, even when that feeling still visits you sometimes. There are forms of support you cannot see, but you recognize them. In the way life no longer pushes back as hard as it once did. In the way doors that do not fit close on their own, so you do not have to step inside just to learn. You never belonged there. In the way your choices carry fewer regrets, even as you continue learning each day. And if right now you feel you no longer need to try so hard to keep everything stable, allow that feeling to exist. It is not laziness. It is not giving up. It may be a sign that you are being supported in a very quiet way. And sometimes the greatest blessing is not something that happens, but the realization that you no longer have to struggle alone on the road you are walking. Libra, when the outside world no longer creates so many waves inside you, your heart finally finds room to breathe. It is not a burst of excitement. It is not a bright, obvious happiness. It is a very quiet kind of stillness. You notice that you no longer react as strongly as before. Words that once stayed with you all day now pass through more lightly. Old memories that used to tighten your chest become distant images, no longer pulling you back into the past. This calm does not come from the idea that everything is suddenly okay. It comes from the moment you stop fighting yourself. Before, you may have been very hard on your own heart. You questioned whether you had done enough, whether you were good enough, whether you were right. You saw yourself through other people's eyes, more often than through the quiet truth inside you. And even if you rarely said it out loud, that weight exhausted you. Now, you may still have questions, but the inner voice asking them is softer, less demanding. Old wounds do not disappear just because you want to forget them. They soften when you stop blaming yourself for having been hurt. Some of the pain you carried was not because you were weak, but because you stayed too long in places that did not offer you enough safety. When you begin to look at your past with compassion instead of judgment, your heart slowly loosens its grip. You do not need to fix everything that happened. You only need to acknowledge that you did the best you could with what you knew at the time. Libra has always been quick to compare. You see harmony in others and wonder why you still feel unsteady. But as your heart grows calmer, you begin to understand that every life moves at its own rhythm. Some journeys cannot be measured by speed or by results. You stop pushing yourself to be like someone else, and instead, you grow curious about who you are truly becoming. Loving yourself in this season does not look like grand affirmations. It looks like allowing yourself to be tired without guilt. It looks like resting when you need to, instead of pretending you are fine. It looks like choosing what makes you feel lighter, even when it does not bring immediate recognition. That gentleness may seem small, but it builds day by day, creating a new foundation for you to stand on. You also begin to listen to your body more closely. You recognize when it is time to pause and when it is time to move forward. Before, you may have ignored those signals to fulfill roles in other people's lives. Now, you understand that if you are not well, any balance outside of you can only be temporary. True peace has to begin within, in the relationship you have with yourself. There are evenings when you do not need to do anything special. You sit quietly. You listen to a familiar song. You watch the lights outside the window. And in that moment, you realize you do not need anything more to feel complete. This feeling is fragile, but it is real. It does not make you indifferent to life. It allows you to stay connected to it in a softer way. From this healing, happiness finds space to grow. Not a happiness that depends on someone else or on something needing to happen, but a happiness that comes from no longer turning away from your own emotions. You allow joy to arrive when it comes, and you allow sadness to stay long enough to be heard before it leaves. Your heart is no longer tightly closed, but it is not thrown open in a rush either. If right now, you feel more steady in situations that once unsettled you, honor that. Peace is not loud. It does not need to be displayed. It is simply the feeling that you no longer have to strain just to exist. And from that quiet ground, the best things can finally enter your life, not to fill a void, but to walk beside a heart that is now strong enough to receive them. Libra, when it comes to the idea of lasting happiness, you may have doubted it many times. Not because you are pessimistic, but because you have lived long enough to know that joy often arrives and leaves just as quickly. You have touched moments that felt complete, only to notice later a quiet emptiness you could not explain. And so you learn to be careful. You stop believing too soon. You hesitated to open your heart fully. You avoided calling something happiness before it had time to stay. But in this season, you may begin to sense something different. Happiness no longer feels like a peak you must climb. It feels more like solid ground beneath your feet. You do not need to jump to reach it. You simply stand still, breathe, and realize you are no longer as empty as you once were. This sense of fullness is quiet. It does not ask to be announced. It does not need witnesses. It simply makes you feel lighter. Libra is deeply sensitive to harmony. When life tilts too far in one direction, you feel it before anyone else does. There were times when you lived more out of responsibility than out of desire, more focused on doing what was right than on doing what made you feel alive. And because of that, you sometimes wondered whether you were truly living your own life. Now, that question no longer unsettles you. You do not need a clear answer. You only need the feeling that the path you are walking does not require you to turn away from yourself. Happiness is drawing closer in very ordinary ways. It may look like a morning when you wake up without feeling weighed down by your list of obligations. It may be the moment you face a new day without putting on emotional armor. It may be the ability to be alone without feeling lonely, and to be with others without feeling the need to tense yourself just to be accepted. These moments sound small, but they form the foundation of a balanced life. You also begin to understand that happiness does not come from everything going your way. It comes from not losing yourself when things do not. Before, a small change could throw you off balance. An unintentional comment could stay with you for hours. Now, you are able to stand more steadily in the middle of uncertainty, not because you have become indifferent, but because you have learned to trust your ability to adjust and recover. Your life may not be fully settled yet. There may still be unanswered questions, but inside, something has shifted. You no longer feel the need to wait for perfection before allowing yourself to feel happy. You understand that if you keep waiting for all the conditions to be right, you may miss many moments worth living. And so you begin to welcome good things as they appear, even when they are fragile. Libra often thinks of others first. You easily step into their perspective. You adjust yourself to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. But in this phase, you are learning to make room for yourself within the larger picture, not by pushing anyone away, but by no longer excluding yourself. When you allow yourself to exist fully as you are, your relationships begin to shift naturally. They feel lighter, less demanding, more honest. Wholeness is not the absence of problems. It is the moment you stop fearing that you will not survive them. You trust the strength of your own heart more now. You trust that whatever happens, you can return to yourself, restore your balance, and move forward without losing what matters most. If life feels a little clearer right now, trust that feeling. You do not need to hold it tightly. You do not need to test it. Simply allow it to stay. You have come a long way. Through doubt, through trials, through days of questioning yourself, and perhaps happiness is not here to change who you are, but to remind you that the person you have become is finally ready to live a life that truly belongs to you.